Firebird owes much to Stravinsky's teacher, Rimsky-Korsakov. That tradition of passing musical ideas from one generation to another also motivates our family concerts at the San Francisco Symphony. Now, Rimsky-Korsakov, Stravinsky's teacher, produced an opera called Mlada, which was a big epic piece about pagan gods of ancient Russia. Well, about 20 years later, Stravinsky, Rimsky-Korsakov's student, was writing his own magical fairy tale piece. It was a ballet called The Firebird. And again, this was a piece about princes and magicians and forces of light and darkness, just as Mlada had been. In Firebird, Stravinsky not only used his teacher's techniques, he even used some of the very same notes. Mlada. Firebird. So I think you can hear the similarities in that music, the brilliant use of the winds, the percussion, the snarling trombones, the glissandos, everything. In other words, Stravinsky really began his musical revolution by using his teacher's music, that Russian fairy tale music that his teacher had perfected. The Firebird premiered in Paris in 1910. True, Stravinsky used Rimsky-Korsakov's style, but he took it to a whole new place. However, Stravinsky had larger ambitions. He didn't want to spend his life writing fairy tale music about swans, firebirds, and other winged creatures flapping around the stage. He wanted to bring music back far closer to its primal origins, to a time when people danced to celebrate their relationship to the earth. In the summer, many well-off Russian families traveled to their dachas in the countryside. Stravinsky frequently summered at Ust-Ilug, where he was exposed to the Russian culture that still thrived in those old villages, the ones that surrounded his family's country home. In the villages, people were still close to the cycles of the earth, and they celebrated the times of planting and harvesting and the mysteries of gods and fate that determined everything. Naturally, they celebrated with music. In the villages, the people made an abandoned kind of music with whatever they had, their natural untrained voices, their hands and feet, and instruments which very often they had built themselves. The result was a kind of wild, enthusiastic mixture of song and noise. This kind of music making made an enormous impression on the young Stravinsky. What he wanted to do was to use the sophisticated symphony orchestra to evoke the wild power of village music, the way it sounded and the way it must feel to the people who were making it. By 1913, the Ballet Russe was the rage of Paris. A new production was announced. It would be choreographed by Nijinsky. There would be opulent sets created by Nicholas Roerich, and a brand new score written by the musical man of the hour, Igor Stravinsky. As the opening night crowd arrived, expectations were high. Mesdames, Messieurs, welcome to the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. It was right here in this theater that one of the most famous opening night scandals in the history of all performing arts took place, the premiere of the Rite of Spring. Now, this theater, as much as it was back in 1913 when the piece was premiered, as you can see, it's a kind of sleek, modernist kind of building for 1913. And it had just opened, and it was really kind of a destination. The audience members wanted to come here and subscribe to this series here to sort of see and be seen and rub shoulders with all different elements of society. You can see here the seating is much more open than in a traditional opera house. So it was possible for Diaghilev to have his high-toned subscribers in this space and pack in around them all kinds of people from more artistic levels of society. Of course, Stravinsky was not seated up here with the patrons. He was down on the orchestra floor. In fact, in seat 20 in row M, there he was, well installed to hear the performance and, of course, easily make his way to the stage to accept his applause. Where things didn't turn out quite as he expected. In the darkness, the first notes of the bassoon were heard, and immediately a ruckus broke out in the auditorium.
The opening bassoon solo, because it was in the highest register of the bassoon, many people in the audience didn't know what instrument this was. And one of those very famous audience members was the composer Camille Saint-Saëns, who was said to have turned to his neighbor and said, "What is that instrument?" And the neighbor said, "Why, that's the bassoon, maestro." And Saint-Saëns said, "If that is a bassoon, I am a baboon."
Then, as the lights came up on the first tableau with that yum, bum, 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 people began yelling things like, "Get them a dentist!" And so it began, this wilder and wilder shouting match. It became difficult even to hear what the music was. This was all too radical for the opening night audience. Ironically, Stravinsky had gone too far forward by trying to go back. He wants to go back to ancient times, to a time of a huge, untouched landscape within which a few little tribespeople will gather once a year to celebrate their fundamental relationship to the earth. As the raw material for this, Stravinsky goes to the actual dance tradition of villages within Russia. He gets a book that's meant to contain all kinds of folk songs which have their roots in those pagan rituals. Now, amongst the tunes that caught his eye as he looked over this book was this one. Now, I'm singing it in a kind of shtick version of what Russian village music can sound like. Stravinsky, of course, knew this music very, very well from his summers spent in Ust-Ilug. And he had already arrived at the solution of suggesting the breaks in the voices of untutored singers by adding grace notes to the lines of the instruments. So this little tune becomes, in his hands, it's much freer, wilder, improvisatory. And now he has to figure out what instrument can play this. I mean, after all, the instruments of the orchestra are modern, perfected instruments of great sophistication. They have no relationship anymore to the primitive village instruments that were played in ancient times, the instruments that people made with their own hands that weren't in tune with anything else.